Hi, my name is Stephanie Williamson, and for the final project, my part was the specific educational context and the multicultural children's book. So, for the specific educational context, this is a fourth grade social studies lesson for general education, and it takes place at the beginning of the American Indian Unit to introduce the history and current lives of American Indians in Texas. So the book we'll be reading is called The Birch Bark House, and at this point in the unit, we'd probably be halfway through it, and it's a 1999 Indigenous juvenile realistic fiction novel by Louise Erdrich and is the first book in a 5-book series known as the Birch Bark series. The story follows the life of Omakayas in her Ojibwe community beginning in 1847 near present-day Lake Superior. So I'm going to read a few pages of it. Omakayas is returning home from an errand. She carries scissors for her mother and a lump of sweet maple candy for herself. Both the scissors and the candy are rare and valued items in her Ojibwe village in 1847. She is not eager to return home to the chores of tanning a moose hide and to her older sister Angeline, who made fun of her earlier in the day. Her feelings are hurt and she wants nothing but to be respected by Angeline. Before she went back on the trail, Omakayas rinsed off the old candy lump in the lake. It came out beautifully, creamy golden, translucent, and grainy dark, and sweet. She started walking, her treasure now wrapped in a leaf. As she walked, Omakayas thought, there was no way to share such a tough nut of sweetness. How would she divide it? Omakayas decided she did not want to cause trouble at home. Furthermore, it suddenly made sense to her that at least one person in the family should get the full effect of maple sugar. She would pop the whole thing into her mouth, all at once. This would save her problems. Ah! The lump was delicious, tasting of spring sweetness and the inside of trees. Besides, Omakayas reasoned, as she walked contentedly along, the taste of sugar would save her from eating every one of the berries she was sure she would find on the path. Omakaya's feet moved slower and even slower yet. For one thing, the moose hide waited. For another, she was still angry with her older sister and didn't want to see Angeline. She could still feel the sister foot pressing hateful on her back. If only there was some way to impress Angeline, cause her envy, make her say, "Can I have some of those berries? Please, please, please." You can be sure, Omakayas thought, her face taking on a faraway, haughty expression. She would be slow in answering. Yet the worst of it was this. Her sister was usually on her side, helping her plan tricks on the other children in the village, or gathering new ferns, or snaring rabbits, visiting the grave houses, looking for sugar or food left for the spirits, tossing off her clothes to swim with her, and to have her older sister laugh at her hurt Omakayas so much inside that she both wanted Angeline to smile in surprise, to be proud, to envy her, and to feel rotten and be sorry forever. So Omakayas took the slow way back looking for odamine, little red heartberries, in the sunny margins of the woods near the ground. She carefully removed the hard lump of sweetness from her mouth, stuck it back in its leaf just inside the pocket of her dress. Just as the taste of maple sugar faded along her tongue, she bent over, pushed back delicate leaves, and found masses of plump red little berries. Ah! 1, 2, 3! She had eaten a huge handful. Another. She grinned, thinking that she'd allow her sister to return with her to plunder them, but only if Angeline changed her ways. All of a sudden, a rustle and then the thump in a bush ahead made Omakayas freeze. A long moment passed as she stared through the dark leaves. Suddenly, crash! 2 bear cubs burst from the bush and rushed pell-mell, tumbling head over heels straight for her. They came on in such a hurry that they didn't see Omakayas until they were nearly in her lap, and then, with comical looks of shock, they tried to stop themselves. One flew flat on its face, bumping its nose and squealing. The other twisted in midair and landed in a heap on the ground, shaking its head in confusion at Omakayas. Their bear boys looked at her. Slowly she put out her open hand filled with heartberries. Curious, the cubs jumped forward, lost their nerve. They scampered backward and then crept forward shyly again. The smaller cub seemed slightly bolder and sniffed at Omakayas' hand. The bear cub took one berry, then jumped away in seeming fright at its own bold act, but the taste of the berry seemed to banish fear. The 2 now tumbled at her, growling, mock ferocious. Their long pink tongues touched up every berry from her hands, eagerly flicking them from her fingers as fast as she could pick. They seemed to like the game. It could have gone on for hours, that is, until she stood upright. Then they tumbled backward in alarm. Their chubby bottoms rolled them over like playing balls, and she laughed out loud. She realized they had thought Omakayas was their own size. They were astonished the same way Omakayas had been the first time she saw the trader Cadot unfold a seeing glass, something he called a telescope, a long shiny tube that grew in his hands. She bent down again. "Onion, little brothers," she said to them kindly, and they came forward.
Good afternoon. This is Grant Davis. Recording my part for the final assignment in Professor Ku's EDB E3480 class. The concepts I will use for this assignment all tie into articles shared throughout the past few months of this course. They are How to Be an Anti-Racist Teacher from the Atlantic, White People Assume That Niceness is the Answer to Racial Inequality, It's Not, from The Guardian, and What Does It Mean When Your Teacher Changes Your Name, from Rethinking Schools. Concept number one is anti-racist teaching. In this day and age, it's simply not enough to be not racist. You have to actively be opposed to the concept of bigotry in all its forms. Anti-racist teaching, conceptually, is the act of building a curriculum that exposes racism for the bile that it is, and encouraging a culture of open-minded thinking in the classroom. The piece selected here emphasizes that the students taught in the classroom um, should be designed to appeal to all races and engage them, since doing so sees better engagement from students, particularly those in marginalized groups. It can also be inferred that students that have fewer hostilities towards one another can work together more efficiently. Therefore, since it's a no-brainer to design a course to be more engaging, um, and produce the best results, the anti-racist teaching isn't just ethical, it's also logical. Since we're approaching a specific demographic of Native Americans, which has faced a long history of injustice from the effects of colonization and even genocide over the course of several centuries, it's important to point out the justices that various groups face in the United States have experienced, Native Americans included. This trauma is not something that just goes away with a simple conversation, because people are still living with the consequences of past atrocities and injustices. We think it's every bit as important to make Native American students feel that they are every bit as welcome to the classroom as anyone else in the classroom. So, why we think that anti-racist teaching is important to these students is because it is fundamentally built on the ideas of love and compassion, the ideas that our founding fathers wanted our nation to live up to. Even though we have yet to live up to the standards that they've set, any progress that gets us closer to being a more perfect union as it was written is a good thing. Making a student feel that they are valued and loved is incredibly important to ensuring that they have better economic and social opportunities than their parents. Concept number two, don't assume that kindness equals anti-racism. Kids in schools, at least when I was growing up, were being conditioned to believe that racism was on the way out. We've seen with the ugly rise of hate groups in the United States, particularly in the past 5 years or so, we can no longer pretend that that's the case. Therefore, kids learning how to be more tolerant and acceptant have to realize they can't just beat racism with niceness. They have to make an active effort discover issues affecting peers of all races and make some changes if need be. While we think, while we like to think that being nice can solve a lot of problems, there are systemic issues that people that affect people just because of their heritage, and we need to recognize that not all things have easy solutions. Native American people were one of the first groups to be marginalized in what would become the United States, and condescending compassion played a significant role in that. So, if we want to make things better for them and other groups that are marginalized, then we have to start speaking up when someone says something deliberately inconsiderately hurtful to people of specific background. Microaggressions, which are not named in the piece itself, still seem to form the core concept of why racist practices occur with nice people who aren't actively being malicious. Hearing the grievances of people of color in white majority classrooms or workplaces can be quite eye-opening in a way that seemingly forward-thinking people might not pick up on. Starting uncomfortable conversations is a method to allow for real change to take place. Concept number three, promote inclusion, don't enforce exclusion. To enforce anti-racism, we ourselves must be open-minded. That has to begin with the tight-knit communities that we form in the classroom. Students from a wide variety of backgrounds are going to appear in there. So we need to create a culture that invites inclusion and acceptance rather than one of division and alienation. We are a diverse nation of people from multiple ancestries and walks of life. And if people love who they are and feel welcome in the classroom, then it might be easier for them to love others and learn from them. Native Americans have a long history of having to take white names to abandon their own practices. This was done in an effort to suppress their own cultural identity and force them to adopt an identity that effectively isn't theirs, before subsequently treating them as an outsider to the group that they were supposedly being integrated into. That's a horrifying practice and one that still has roots in what happens today, so we need to start making changes to break the cycle. In the source that I've cited for this particular concept, a person of color was encouraged to simplify her name in order to create conformity, to ensure a more American identity. Instead, she ended up feeling more alienated from her peers and losing a piece of her own cultural identity in the process. Some people aren't going to fit perfectly into every societal norm that we think of when we think of America, and that's perfectly fine. We should embrace that as our nation inevitably has to embrace the process of change. So this has been my contribution to this project. I hope you have enjoyed it, and let's make this great.
Hi, it's Abby here, and today for our intervention activity, we're going to take a deeper look into the Native American cultures in Texas, try to look at some current ones. This is a current one that I did an example on, the Chickapow tribe. And so the students are going to pick from a list of tribes, and they are going to either make a report, a scrapbook, or a PowerPoint presentation. We gave some websites for them to use and different topics that they need to cover. So for the scrapbook, which I did the example for, it must include all the things from the rubric, organized, and one topic per page. The report must be in paragraph form, 3 sentences at least per paragraph, and each paragraph is going to be one topic. And for the PowerPoint presentation, 1 slide is going to be a topic, minimum of 8 slides because we have 8 topics. And yeah, so I'm going to show you my example here. I did title page, Chickapow, and my name and class. Made a table of contents. This is my location. I currently reside in Denton, Texas. Then I did the Chickapow regions. So they started over here, and that's where they originated. Then they were pushed to briefly settle here. And then eventually they were pushed all the way south, and this is where they currently reside. There's 3 tribes federally recognized today, which are in Texas, Kansas, and Oklahoma. And there's also tribes in southern Mexico. So take a look at their shelters. These are small dome-shaped houses called wickiups. And today, the tribes in Mexico still live in these. However, the American tribes do not live in these. They mostly live in modern homes and apartments. So taking a deeper look into what the tribes do today is kind of going past the tourist information. Take a look at their food. Their staple crop was corn, and with that they made a baked cornbread called punga, I think. And then the women stayed at home, took care of the children, and planted the crops and cooked. So they mostly planted squash and beans, and the men hunted, and they hunted deer, small game, and fish. And for clothing, the warriors wore these porcupine roach headdresses, and they're made of porcupine fur, and they also wore breechcloths, which can be worn with leggings between the legs and tucked into a belt. They also wore fur caps, moccasins, and beaded headbands. Spiritual beliefs, they believed in the afterlife, and they had spiritual ceremonies for life and death, so birth and a passing of one in the tribe, and they believed in spiritual messengers. And I have a fun facts page here is where I kind of took into my own interest and what I thought was interesting about the tribe. So for arts and crafts, they did pottery, quill work, wood carving, and then they also made wampums, which are made out of purple and white beads, and they can be worn on belts, traded like currency. On the belts, it would show a story of a family or an event that's happened. And then their tribal name means wanderer. So this is my example, and taking a deeper dive into those topics helps learn past the tourist information that we get from these tribes.